Welcome back, all you nerds. This is Nerdy by Nature, and I'm your host, Agent Smith, aka Tyler.
And I'm Charlie, aka Captain Rogers.
And wanted to do a friendly reminder here at the beginning as to where you can find us to listen to this podcast. You got a few options. You can listen to us on Anchor, a platform for podcasting, Breaker, Castbox, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. We've got audio only on YouTube. And so, Cap, in our last episode, we reviewed the collected run of House of X, Powers of X by Jonathan Hickman, which we both really enjoyed. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, by all means, pause this one, go back, listen to that one. We think you'll enjoy it. I know that we certainly enjoyed talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
But for this episode, we'll be breaking down and reviewing Bad Boys for Life, the third installment of this movie franchise, featuring, of course, Will Smith and Martin Lawrence back once again in their respective roles as Mike Lowry and Marcus Bennett, Miami police detectives, who, let's be honest, are probably most everyone's favorite action comedy cop duo.
Agreed.
And we get to see some cool cameos in this one, along with a few returning characters from the first two films. And Cap, it was just pretty much exactly what we expected. Mm-hmm. A action comedy that delivered what we were wanting to see from two older aging stars. You have to realize this is, of course, 17 years from Bad Boys 2, so they've aged a little bit, so the action isn't quite as ramped up as what we get in 1 and 2, but still just a solid popcorn action film.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Nothing too deep. It's just a fun time to just sit down and just watch a movie, honestly. And that's why I've always been a fan of the franchise. And it's great to see everybody back. There was a lot more of the original cast in this movie than I even realized was coming back. I mean, it did a great job of continuing the story and not wavering from the story.
No, not at all. And speaking of returning cast members, there were more than I expected. So, for example, we get Teresa Burnett, Marcus's wife,
mm-hmm.
who is, of course, comedic relief and just hilarious in all of the films.
Right.
For sure, and that's played by Teresa Randall. And then we also get his daughter Megan Burnett, same as in Bad Boys 2, and so that is Bianca Bethune. And then we also get a really nice callback with Reggie making his return.
That was hilarious to me. I did not expect that to go anywhere or to continue.
And that's just a hilarious scene there in Bad Boys 2 when he picks her up for the first date. The back and forth between, we can't necessarily repeat it. We try to stay clean here on Nerdy by Nature
right.
as much as possible. But still just a hilarious, and you can YouTube it, Bad Boys 2, Megan's date or Reggie scene,
right.
It's pretty hilarious. And so that actor's name is Dennis Green, so he reprised his role as an older Reggie, who is now, as we find out in the opening scenes, just become a father, and then there's this big wedding scene as well, so it's just really neat to see them all back and interacting with one another pretty, for the most part, seamlessly.
Oh yeah, definitely, and you would never... Well, I equate it much to how I felt about Zombieland 2, in that it's been such a long time since the last installment, but everybody just picks up where they left off, and it feels seamless to me. I mean, yes, it's been many years, and they've aged, and they even address it in the movie, and there is a little bit less action in this one versus the first two, but I still think it was really balanced well, but it made sense that there wasn't as much action because these guys are older. They've been doing this for 20-something years, as they state in the movie, and so it's not quite as much as the first two, but it's not a problem.
No, I think the action throughout it is appropriate, especially given the fact that it's been so long since Bad Boys 2, and like you said,
right.
In that bar scene with Marcus getting congratulated on becoming a grandfather, he mentions that they've been on the force and on the job for 25 years, and so you understand that it's been a while since we've seen these bad boys, and I thought that they, just like Zombieland 2, as you mentioned, did a great job of very quickly nipping that right in the bud and saying, yeah, hey, it's been a while, but we're back. Bad boys are back. And so once you get that out of the way, it's just action-packed, plenty of comedy laced throughout. And speaking of addressing some things, let's go ahead real quick, Cap, and make an edit here from our last episode.
Right.
So we had mentioned that this third installment was directed by Michael Bay. Not the case. So it's actually directed by Adil El Arbi and by Lal Falah, and they did a really good job. I thought, to me, they did such a good job that I would have almost thought for a second that it was a Michael Bay film. So I think they stayed true to the first two, and we even get a pretty cool cameo by Michael Bay himself as the wedding MC, if I'm not mistaken, if memory's serving me right.
Yes, definitely. And I caught it when we were watching the movie, and I was like, is that Michael Bay? I think it is. But anyway, and that's another thing that, going back to the fact that there's not near as much action, you might attribute that to the fact that Michael Bay is not the director, but it's still, like I said before, it makes sense that there isn't any way within the story because of them being older and a lot less likely to be, hotshot cops and just do whatever they want to type of thing.
And, don't get us wrong or twisted here. There was plenty of action throughout this film.
Oh, yeah.
Just not as much as we got in Bad Boys 1 and 2.
Right. And I will say, going back to the cast and everybody returning, there were two absences that kind of bummed me out. I would have liked to have seen them come back, and that was the two cops, Vargas and Reyes, because their interactions with Marcus and Mike from the second one, I don't remember them being in the first one, but they were in the second one, and it was a great dynamic between those two sets of detectives, because it was like they were always at odds and they were always like competing with one another, but when push came to shove, they were all on the same team, and they didn't actually like hate each other, basically.
No, and I think that holds true, for most police forces. There's
Right.
all that camaraderie, and then that back and forth, or anything you can do, I can do better, and giving each other a hard time. That's pretty much anywhere you work, really.
Definitely.
But it was just nice to see that in Bad Boys 2, and I agree. I think it would have been nice to at least maybe had them come back in a small cameo,
Right.
or at least something to that effect.
It just felt lacking because there was so many people from the first and second movie that came back. It would have been nice to have seen them.
No doubt. And so, Cap, let's go ahead and get into discussing our favorite action scenes. Of course, we've already went through the trouble of mentioning there aren't as many as we would have hoped, but the ones that we get are solid. And I'm curious to hear what your favorite is.
Well, I think probably my favorite was when Mike meets up with Marcus and he's in his minivan and he's got the baby with him, and I can't remember exactly what they were doing, but they were going to investigate something.
Well, so I'll help you out here.
Okay.
So what it was is they had a tip from one of their old
Right.
previous rats under the system, and so they were going to meet him. And he, of course, as most action films, it often happens this way, is on top of a tall building or hotel, right at the very top, and is like, "Hey, meet me up here so we can be secluded, and I'll tell you the information that's a secret." And we pretty much know where it's going to go,
Right.
but I'll let you finish it. It's your favorite scene.
Yeah, it was just funny because like they get there to talk to the guy, and all of a sudden they get out of the van to go up to this building that he's in, and all of a sudden behind them you see a body land on the van, and you get a nice little comedic remark from Marcus saying, "Oh, that better been a piano or something, or a safe or something like that." And then after that, then Marcus stays down with the van. And Mike goes running up the building trying to find out who just threw this guy off of the building. And what ensues is just this big fight between Mike and the bad guy while Marcus is down on the ground watching. And just, it wasn't a whole lot of action, I don't guess, but it was just it was action, but it was also comedy, and so it worked well.
Well, I think you could easily make the argument that there was plenty of action because Mike does go up to confront, whoever it is that's actually thrown their reporter, or rat, if you will, off of the roof.
Right.
And really, Mike meets his match because he's ill-prepared for this. He's trying to stay with him blow for blow, but is really pretty much getting whooped.
That's true.
And Marcus watches this and sees it himself, like, oh, he's in trouble. Like he bit off more than he could chew.
Right.
This is not looking good for my boy Mike, and it doesn't. But important scene because he's able to lift up his motorcycle helmet and see who this guy is. We should preface a little bit with much earlier in the film, this same antagonist, who it turns out to be is actually Armando Aretes, one of the sons of a previous cartel couple that they had put behind bars years and years ago.
Right.
He, in the way of his mother, is trying to help get her revenge. She breaks out of prison. Crazy, wild scene that is.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a second. But he's able to essentially try to avenge her and get this revenge and take out all the people that were on her case that brought her to justice. And so he's taking them out one by one, and he saves Mike for last, and so, or at least tries to. And so he, on a motorcycle in Miami, takes him out on the street right after they had celebrated Marcus's new grandbaby being born.
Right.
And so flash forward, and so Will Smith's character Mike Lowry is trying to take this into his own hands. So they go to their informant on top of the roof who gets thrown off. And so then it's just an all-out, Duke mano a mano there on the roof for a little bit. And then, of course, he meets up with Marcus as he gets away. Armando does. And that's when Marcus says, I think you met your match there, didn't you?
Right.
And so then, of course, we come back to another comedic moment to end that. So it essentially was comedy, action, comedy.
Right.
In that scene. And Marcus looks at the windshield, and then his phone rings. And he's like, oh, no, it's Teresa. She knows. She always knows. And so it's just, funny moments that were still funny from the first two films. They injected, I should say, into Bad Boys for Life. And
definitely
it didn't feel forced. And I think that the comedy was where it needed to be. And especially the undeniable chemistry between Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. It's like, I'm sure they've kept in touch, but they haven't done a film, to my knowledge, since Bad Boys 2.
Actually,
so to see them pick up where they left off like they did,
right.
I was impressed.
And actually, surprisingly, I read that apparently Martin Lawrence had completely retired from acting before this movie, and he actually came out of retirement to do this movie. So that's one of the reasons why you hadn't seen them together since. But I thought that was interesting, and I'm glad that he did. And it's kind of looking like it might continue.
Possibly. I'm sure Martin Lawrence wouldn't complain if he got asked to come back for a fourth film or some kind of spin-off, or maybe a TV series seems to be the popular thing to do now.
Right.
After a movie has box office success for these past couple years, it seems like.
That would actually be pretty interesting in and of itself, a TV series spin-off from this movie franchise.
It'd be interesting. I just don't know if Will Smith would have... I know Martin Lawrence would have the time to do it. I'm not so sure if Will Smith would have the time to fit that into what I would assume would be a busy schedule, because he seems to be in just about every trailer I've seen in the last year or so.
Oh yeah, you're right about that. So what was your favorite action scene?
So mine has to be it sparks from their trip to the Miami nightclub to find Zuelo. He's one of the henchmen, or sort of the next first in line general for Armando in this new, somewhat of I guess you'd call it a cartel army, sort of. They're trying to rebuild their ranks and take over, at least establish a firmer base there in Miami.
Right.
And so they go after this Zuelo character, and he ends up being a kid that Marcus used to coach.
That was hilarious.
Or some type of travel ball. And so that's a funny moment that we get. And so he said, I told you he was an athlete, because they find him up in this VIP section. And so he jumps off and onto a club tower there that crashes into the floor, takes running off, gets onto a motorcycle. And then what ensues is this mad Miami motorcycle mayhem just through the streets, and they've got all kinds of different firearms, submachine guns. And so then, of course, Marcus all the while is trying to be a new man and not be violent. And he made this prayer when Mike got shot: hey God, if you just bring my boy back, everything will be alright, and I won't bring any more violence into this world. Just please don't let Mike die. And so he's trying to explain this feverishly to Mike, like, hey, I made this vow that if you lived and came back, I wouldn't be violent. And Mike's like, well, forget all that right now, and just let's take care of this, because we got people shooting at us. Have you forgot?
Oh yeah, it was hilarious, because he was like, do you think God would want you not to do this right now? It was funny how Will Smith was able to explain and change his mind about that.
You did, and you saw his thought process change like that. You're right. Why else would there be
We're doing God's work.
Why would there be a gun right here as a part of my sidecar?
Right.
And so then he just starts chucking that and firing off these heavy rounds at cars and motorcycles that are coming up his way. And so to me, plus we get a really neat helicopter action scene where Mike Lowry jumps onto the ladder after Zuelo, because Armando is in the helicopter, trying to get him out of that situation, and just show how much power that they have amassed. And look, you can't touch us. We'll get our people out with motorcycles, helicopters, by any means necessary.
Oh yeah, they were very surprised when they saw a helicopter come in.
And I think really, it also showed that unfortunately Mike and Marcus weren't quite the same bad boys that they used to be, and so they knew they were going to have to reach out and get some help to really crack this case and bring these guys down. Definitely. So for me, that's why it was my favorite action scene. You just got, much like yours, a little bit of comedy sprinkled in, but then plenty of big moments and booms, and just high octane, okay, what's going to happen next?
Right.
And so I had mentioned that they needed some help. after this big action scene, realizing that they weren't going to be able to get it done just themselves, tandem. And so, of course, that brings us into this new division that's introduced to us in this film called AMMO of the Miami Police Force. And essentially, it's this high-tech, young, hip, new-look police officing task force that's been assembled, and it's led by Lieutenant Rita, played by Paulo Nunez. And she, in this particular film, is someone that used to be an interest for Mike. And, of course, Marcus gives him a hard time throughout, saying, you really should have made things happen with her. Like, what were you thinking?
Right.
Because, of course, she's gorgeous in her own right, and so you're like, oh, wow, yeah, why wouldn't he have? It seems like she's a headstrong lady, has a great job locked down, they both work at the same place, they could commute, but of course, we know that for the most part, Mike's always kind of been that debonair playboy, no one's ever going to tie me down type lifestyle, and of course, we also, in light of that, get introduced, and we see that we get another great return, and that's with Captain Howard, so played by Joe Pantoliano.
Definitely, and just seeing him back, that was just another one of the main original cast, and it was great to see him back. He was just as funny and just as serious as he always has been in the first two movies. And the one, I guess, scene that cemented to me that, yes, this is a Bad Boys movie was the first time we see Marcus and Mike in Captain Howard's office with him. And it's just a really funny scene where they're talking to him about something that just happened, and you see his old stressed out self where he starts yelling at him and pulls out his bottle of Pepto-Bismol and just starts drinking it straight from the bottle.
And once he pulled out that Pepto, I was like, okay, yep, here we go.
Yeah.
This is classic Bad Boys.
Yes.
He's about to go in and be like, guys, listen, here's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
And so to go back to introduce you all to the AMMO officers, so of course we get Vanessa Hudgens as Kelly, we have Alexander Ludwig as Dorn, the tech guru, but also just a big hulk of a guy.
Oh yeah, he's a big, strong guy that you think, this guy's a tech guy? You would think that...
You question it at first, you're like, wait a minute, he can't just be the tech guy, right?
Right.
Surely he's tech/muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course we also get Charles Melton as Raph, and he's kind of the hot shot. It's funny because in a lot of ways he is the Mike Lowry of the group.
Right.
If you think about it.
The new group, definitely. And out of that group, Dorn has to be my favorite, just because you know that there's something else going on with this guy. And of course I'm a tech guy, so I really like all the tech stuff and everything as well, but just him being this big hulking figure, and it's kind of alluded to that there was some past stuff that happened with him anyway, because I think it's even said somewhere in there that he had to go to counseling of some sort from a past incident, so there was a reason he was a tech guy and didn't want to get physical in the job anymore.
For sure, he definitely took on kind of a pacifist approach
to
violence. Like, you knew he was capable, but you also, like you said, knew there was that backstory. And for me, he was one of my favorites of that group too. And I think, honestly, he was probably the audience's favorite as well, because we didn't get a whole lot of him, where he was kind of that strong but silent type. We got plenty of Vanessa Hudgens and Charles Melton's characters, especially with dialogue and action. But with Dorn in particular, Alexander Ludwig's character, we were just waiting for that, okay, come on, like he's the sleeping giant, he's got to have his moment or his shine. And he definitely gets that in the climax, which we'll get to in a moment, but there's another big moment that we have to go over that we weren't really expecting.
I don't want to go over it.
Well, I mean, man, step one, we have to talk about it. So, part of the grieving process. And so, fast forward a little bit in the film here, and so essentially, Mike is coming to terms with the fact he's trying to figure out and find where Armando Areta is, because he's been taking out all these people, he's hot on the case, Ammo's trying to help out, and they keep running into all these problems, or Armando is always one step ahead, with the help of his mother, Isabella Aretas, part of the cartel that they brought down years and years ago.
And at this point, you realize that Mike is a target, a major target for him. So
because he's already been taken out, presumably, Armando thought he took him out on the streets in Miami before, and realizes, okay, well, he made it through, and now we're going to torture him and wait and make him suffer and understand what he did, because essentially, Mike was one of the ones that led to his father, Mr. Aretas, being getting taken out. And so Isabella wants revenge for her husband and for his father. And so, of course, we come to a head here where Captain Howard is letting Mike know, like, hey, listen, if you're going to go after this, or if you're going to approach the situation, here's how you need to think about it. And so he gives them this analogy about stress, and there's a horse involved as well. And it's a funny one. They're at a ball game of his daughter's, and he's trying to tell her, like, hey, take your shot. Shears, take the shot.
Right.
So it's a touching moment because they're having that heart-to-heart of, hey, man, look, before you go down this path, here's what you need to consider. And so they're out in the parking lot, and next thing you know, it just seems, movie's progressing. Okay, well, they're going to end this scene with them going to dinner, and instead, what we get is a bullet straight through the jugular of Captain Howard. And it's one of those moments where you weren't really expecting it. It was just like, oh, snap.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, it's Armando doing the shooting, and just takes him right out. Will knows this. It says we got to captain down. Unfortunately, it's too late. I think at that moment, it was one of those movie moments where it really gets personal, and it's like, okay, now, they've been trying to find him and get after him, but there was that big moment where they're like, okay, enough's enough, all hands on deck, let's get these guys.
Oh yeah, Mike's at that point, Mike is like, it's over. I'm taking this guy out now. And it was a rough scene, and I didn't expect it, and he was one of the best characters from the whole franchise, so I was even clinging to the possibility that maybe he would pull through during that scene, but unfortunately no. And that was one, it needed to happen, and it made sense for it to happen, but at the same time, it was one part of the movie that I didn't care for, I guess.
Understandable, to each their own. And so that plummets us right into the climax of this movie, which is pretty action-packed. There's moments throughout the movie that has action, but obviously in the climax, that's where you want to see the most. And so what we get is them traveling to Mexico City. They do all this research, they figure out where they're at, and sort of triangulate their positions and get all the help that they can from Team Ammo, from the department. And so they go to Mexico City, and they find all of these clues. And of course, Mike Lowry has a revelation that he understands exactly who this is, and he realizes that it's Isabella Aretas pulling all the strings here, and so he remembers who she is, and that brings back some memories that really we're seeing for the first time. And this is also information about Mike Lowry's character that predates Bad Boys, essentially.
Right. Yeah, I didn't expect to get something like that either, but it was interesting, and it worked. It didn't feel out of place or odd or anything, especially since it was pre-Bad Boys, so it made sense in the context of the movie. So.
You could make the argument that for the climax and for the action film, it was convenient that there was this all of a sudden backstory or memory, but to me, like you said, it seemed more natural, and he did the research and looked up the data, and then it started to click of, oh no, it's who I thought it was, it's who I feared that this is who it was. And then we get another big revelation, a big moment, where we find out that Armando is actually Mike Lowry's son, or at least that's what he puts the pieces of the puzzle together for when he's doing his research, and sees that Isabel, was locked up, and 8 months after her lockup, she gave birth, and so he's doing the timeline and realizing, he's our love child, because they, behind Mr. Aretas' back, were having an affair.
Yeah, it basically turns out that, I guess he was deep undercover, and this all takes place before he gets partnered up with Marcus. And so, it was interesting. It was very surprising. I didn't see it coming at all. So.
And it's just a big shock overall, because you're like, whoa, wait a minute. To me, watching the movie the whole time, at no point did I think, maybe this guy is Mike Lowry's long-lost son. Did not think about that at all. So to me, it was a nice, surprising twist, and I was glad, because I think without that, I would have ranked this movie a little bit lower, where I would have been like, it was okay, but not one that I would recommend. But because of this twist, it's like, you know what, totally worth, along with the comedy and the action, it's worth the watch.
Yeah, it definitely, most of the time, a good twist is one that you don't see coming, or don't make the connections for before it happens, in my opinion.
And so we should also mention that by this point, Ammo has been shut down, and so really it turns out to be what looks like a solo mission by Mike. He's going to go take care of the Aretas once and for all, take on Armando by himself, and we see him at the airport and gets on the plane. And then, of course, Marcus is in the row behind him like, hey man, are you really going to go to Mexico City without me? Like, I've got your back. back, bad boys for life.
Right.
And so we get a hilarious plane scene, which is full of all different kind of comedic nuggets that are just a lot of fun to watch and fun to laugh at. And so then we get to Mexico City, and of course, as we just mentioned, Mike tracks them down to this rundown hotel that he and Isabel used to frequent. And so he's essentially going to take on, it's just them versus the cartel, or so we think, and we know better.
Right.
And of course, the members of Ammo come back together, and Mike's like, oh, I guess you called them too, and Marcus is like, of course, man, you know, we're all going to do this together. And so Rita's there as well, and so they team up to take on both the cartel hostiles and the Aritas, Isabel and Armando. And from there, I mean, of course, just action gets ramped up. Mike confronts Isabel and says, why didn't you ever tell me I had a son? She, of course, gives him the back and forth of, what would you have done? I thought we were a thing. You locked me up, da-da-da-da. Tensions rise, and of course, the cartel comes in, tries to take them out. But, you know, Ammo is well-trained, and so they start to do their thing. And at this point, we get our first glimpse of Dorn really breaking out and being like, because they say, we're like, hey man, we know you're a nice guy, and you're into tech, and you had some issues, but we're going to need you to get mad and take out some people.
It was very reminiscent of the Hulk situation. So he just goes crazy, and before he does it, he even says, you know, I'm going to need therapy after this. And they all kind of take that as a joke, but then he reiterates, no, I'm really going to need therapy. And then Mike is like, okay, I got you, man. I'll take care of it, because obviously Mike's character is pretty wealthy in the franchise. So you just get a really awesome moment of him going crazy on this group of people, and solidified my feeling that he was one of my favorite characters in the movie.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the moment that the audience was waiting for. Like, okay, are we going to see this guy go off? Or at least, you know, use some of that size? And it's just the full tilt effect of, oh, wow. Okay, yeah. You know, this guy deserves to be on this team. He's not just a tech guy.
Right.
Like, yeah, he knows how to use his size. And so, of course, from there, we get into a big point of the climax where Mike winds up confronting his son one-on-one. They battle it out, and he eventually tells him, like, listen, I don't want to hurt you anymore. I'm not going to keep doing this. There's something you need to know. And tells him outright, I am your dad. And he finds it hard to believe. And so, of course, Isabel pops back in and tells Armando, like, take him out. And so he asks, like, hey, before I do this, is this true? Because, of course, he realizes, you know, like, if this is true, can I really take out my father?
Right.
And so, of course, she levels and says, of course it's true, but it doesn't matter. Take him out. Don't disobey me. And, of course, he can't. And Isabella's like, fine, if you can, I will. And so, of course, she goes to shoot at Mike, and Armando steps in front, and we think, oh, wow, like, she just willingly would have shot through her son, to get to Mike Lowry. That's how deep-seated this hate is, and understandably so. I mean, essentially fell in love with her and then locked her up for a long time. I mean, she deserved it, but we get where she's coming from.
Yeah, it was a classic, you know, I was undercover and I'm going to stab you in the back, basically, even though I've fallen in love with you. And, I mean, I don't think you really had any other choice, but it felt very, not cliche, but it was something you've seen several times in other stuff.
For sure, and even up to the point of her falling off the edge there and literally going down in flames.
Right.
Because, of course, before that, there's a helicopter that's flying around the hotel, running off random shots of ammo. And, of course, Marcus at one point is like, where do they keep getting all these helicopters from, man? They have all these helicopters. And he takes out the helicopter pilot, and Mike is telling him, no, take out the engine. And so he takes out the pilot. There's this big dome, which I'm sure at one time was a gorgeous ceiling.
Right.
Stained glass artwork and what have you. And then the helicopter starts to swirl in and smashes right through that. And so then shards of glass are very dangerously falling down and onto members of the cartel and members of ammo, and they're like, you know, this building's coming down, we've got to go. Grab your son, we got to get out of here.
Yeah, and that was just a really funny moment for me, because you're sitting there and Marcus is shooting at the helicopter, and meanwhile Mike is sitting over to the side saying, shoot the engine, not the pilot, shoot the engine. And then Marcus is like, the pilot? Okay, I got it. And he shoots, and he's like, no, not the pilot, the engine. And then he shoots and hits the pilot and says, I got him. And then you realize the reason Mike was saying shoot the pilot, or shoot the engine, not the pilot, is because he saw that, you know, it's very likely that this helicopter would come crashing down on them.
Right, and from there, everybody, of course, that we want to make it out makes it out. So the members of ammo are fine, Lieutenant Rita's fine, Marcus and Mike are out, he's got Armando, and of course, you know, for a second we wonder, is Armando going to make it? But he gets a medic and everything's good to go. go, and they all wind up making it back stateside. And for the most part, we get a happy ending for Ammo because I'm not sure if they're rebranded, or I'm sure they're at least reinstated somewhat with Force and are doing well. And of course, we find out that Lieutenant Rita is actually promoted to Captain, so she becomes Captain Rita, which is exciting. And of course, Marcus is just beginning his grandfather role, and so with that, it's been a while since he and Teresa have had some personal time, so they get to have a getaway, and Mike gets pretty much left with the the baby, which is hilarious. He's like, wait a minute, I thought we all these members of Ammo were going to watch the baby. What? Come on, guys. And so more or less the movie comes to a close there, or so we think.
Right.
And then we get a mid-credit scene, which I wasn't expecting. I thought...
No, I wasn't either.
We got up from our seats and we're about to walk our way out, and then all of a sudden we see more film footage, and we're like, oh, okay, wait a minute, what do we have going on here? And so what it ends up being is Will Smith, Mike Lowry, who's coming into this jail, because obviously, of course, Armando has taken out multiple high-ranking officials and other people, so it's like he's done the crime, he's gonna have to do the time.
Right.
Will Smith, Mike Lowry's son or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, Mike approaches Armando and says, hey, how you holding up? And he's like, I'm doing all right. And he says, well, we've got an opportunity for you. If you're interested, you might be able to shave off a little bit of that time. What do you say? And he's like, yeah, shaving off some time? That sounds good. And it ends from there.
Right, and
so,
I did not expect that at all. Like, I thought this was a, finale to this franchise, but it seems like it's been left open for possible either spin-off or sequel to it,
And I suppose only, time will tell in their schedules, and it seems to be doing fairly decent at the box office right now. It's getting mixed reviews, and I'd say, if I'm not mistaken, on Rotten Tomatoes the last time I checked, it was about at 70%, 75%, so fairly well received. But again, you get what you pay for with this one. It's definitely an action comedy film that we enjoyed, and if you like I guess that's what we should preface with, if you like the Bad Boys film franchise, then you'll certainly like Bad Boys for Life.
Right.
And with that, Cap, let's go ahead in true Nerdy by Nature fashion here and give this our ranking. I'll let you start with how you ranked this particular film.
Okay. Well, we kind of established that 4 and above is just our, this is fantastic, hardly can be beat by anything type of ranking. So I would say out of 5, I would go with about a 3.5, just because I'm a big fan of the franchise and it was a nice return to these characters, and so I really enjoyed it, and I hope it continues. If they're planning on continuing it, then I will definitely be there to see it. So I'm just going to stick with the 3.5 for right now. How about you?
I think that's fair, and for me, I clocked in almost the same, so I'm going to give it a 3. And the only reason being is because, of course, for us, like you had said in the previous episode, these types of action films don't really have much depth or complexity that you get what you pay for, like we just said.
Right.
But I still thought it was well done. I didn't feel like it was cheesy or sort of one of those, okay, did we really have to do another Bad Boys movie? And in fact, quite the opposite. When you and I initially saw the trailer this summer, we thought, oh, okay, yeah, that's definitely one. We put it on our list of like, yeah, we definitely want to go see that.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a highly watchable film, and Will Smith and Martin Lawrence don't miss a beat, so they're always, solid. So for me, I think just a very watchable, good action comedy with a surprising twist. So
right.
for sure, that's why I'm giving it that solid 3. Because for us, I think a 3 is, on our scale, definitely watchable. We recommend you go see it. 2.5 below, that's where we might tell you, your judgment call.
Right.
And so that's going to wrap up this episode of Nerdy by Nature. So as always, be sure to hit the like button, leave us a comment, and share this on all forms of social media and with those who you think would enjoy it. And also be sure to check out and join our Facebook group with the same name, Nerdy by Nature. Throw it into the search query there and just click the join button, and so then we'll make sure to add you to the group. I think right now, last I checked, Cap, we are at 75. So our goal for the end of February is to see if we can maybe get to 100. So if you're already a member and you're listening, feel free to invite anybody else that you think would like the group. We're going to start getting more involved and coming up with some topics of discussion, chatting with you guys and getting to know our fan base a little bit better. It's time that, we actually get in touch with you guys and see what you want to hear and check out those comments for sure. And now our next episode, we'll be checking out some of the buzz that's surrounding the CW's 5-episode crossover event called Crisis on Infinite Earths, which takes place over the span of a few different DC shows on the CW. For example, Arrow, The Flash, and Supergirl. So be on the lookout for that. And Cap, it's one that I'm looking forward to getting into because I don't know a whole lot about the side story of the Crisis on Infinite Earths, but of course, anything with DC, the storyline is usually solid.
Yeah.
So I want to see what that's all about, and I've heard that the cameos are pretty big.
Oh yeah, it's just a fun thing that DC does pretty much once a year for the last few years. It's just a chance for them to intersect or intertwine all of their different shows on the CW, and it's 5-part, and it's really cool. The way they do it is, even if you don't follow the shows during the year, generally their crossover events are still watchable and enjoyable because they're kind of standalone things within these universes, basically. So I don't really know how accurate it is versus the comic book run. I haven't read that in so long, I don't even remember hardly any of it. But the cameos, I mean, they went all out for the cameos between, all the different networks and different shows that are in existence right now. For any DC character, you can pretty much guarantee a cameo or a mention from pretty much all of DC's properties.
And so we look forward to bringing you that crossover event recap and review. And until next time, I'm Agent Smith.
And I'm Captain Rogers. God bless.